On this wet Bungtown morning, we're taking the new highway out towards the site of the Nui Dat base, and we'll visit the Sass Hill site. Went Hualong.
Yeah, they weren't around.
The Hualong markets are in that yellow building just across the way. Incredibly, none of these houses and so on existed during the 60s and early 70s when Nui Dat was occupied by the Australians. Getting close to the base, Nui Dat base.
We have the remains of the pearly gates, which were built on the access road to the task force base.
Remember them?
We're now on the old road into the base. But there would have been no buildings, we just passed a few, there wouldn't have been any buildings on this road at that time.
We are sitting on the south edge of Nui Dat Hill. It was essentially almost a horseshoe, being the rim of an extinct volcano. But because it was igneous rock, it was quarried for roads, concrete, gravel, anything solid that we needed. And even at our stage, we were concreting it and grinding it and laying it down. One of the little known facts of our deployment to Phuc Tuy province is that when the Allied forces first came to Vietnam, there was no source of gravel, no convenient source of gravel. That's one of the reasons that the infrastructure was so rotten when we got here. And in fact, in the first year of the war, of our wars, in '65 and '66, the Americans were actually importing gravel from Korea. One of the factors of saying, well, the Australians can look after this area, we really need gravel. And we secured the province, amongst many other reasons, as a gravel source, and the importation from Korea then diminished. If you wanted to walk to the other end of this platform and look down, that is Kangaroo Pad in the little valley there. Big helicopter pad, and we used to use it for medevac mostly, not for troop transport, because coming in from the field, any casualties would be fed into a preliminary hospital complex there, and immediate treatment would be done, and then they'd be taken down to Vung Tau, to the main hospitals. Troop transports essentially were taken from Luscombe Field, which is just over the rim of this hill, and before that far distant rubber. This, what we're standing on now, this is the remainder of another helipad which was mostly used by the SAS. The SAS living there, when they went on their patrols, would come down to 9 squadron choppers and load and unload here. That hill that you see there in rubber, that was task force headquarters. In my day it was the SAS. Reinforcement unit, signals unit, on the other side engineers, on the other side, this side HQ of the APCs, and on the other side of the road the APCs themselves, and beyond the rubber, in my day, all the artillery, the New Zealand 161, Australian and American 155s, all on that side. Great to be able to support the fronts of the east, north and west, and never expecting to fire south because the village that we've just driven through, Hualong, was only a K away. From the APCs there was nothing in front of the hill until you got to the end of that rubber plantation over there, where the battalion took over. Now, in my day it was 5 battalion, took that rubber plantation there facing north. And in my day they put D Company on the hill. Later the company went back to the infantry and the SAS came onto the hill. Where that rubber plantation there meets that rubber plantation there was the division between, in my day, 5 battalion and 6 battalion. But subsequently 2 battalions were always rotating. Those are the 2 battalions, one facing north, one facing east. In true military fashion, when they deployed the battalion, it was A, B, C, D company. So D company, my company, was at the south end of that close rubber plantation there, and we were actually facing south. The valley that I showed you in the diagrams is the valley beyond this rubber plantation on the skyline, and that rubber plantation over there in the distant skyline, and that is the Long Tan rubber plantation. I'm not sure if I bought it, but I have a picture taken of a person standing on this hill, looking down into the audience and onto the stage, and beyond that you can see the 6th Battalion rubber, and beyond that you can see the Long Tan rubber. And in that photo, basically when it was taken, we were starting to get into trouble, visual distance. That's how close the battle was. That's the Long Tan rubber there.
Headquarters is over here, probably just a bit to the right of that pole there. Grass, it wasn't developed at all at that stage in August. That afternoon, I was in the lines up there in headquarters, and the first thing we knew was a tremendous amount of small arms fire. We could just hear it in the distance coming from over in that direction. So that's the first thing that alerted us to something that was really going on, and something big, because we've never heard anything like that before. Not long after that, of course, the guns started firing, and they're over here and they're firing pretty much over the top of us. So once the guns started firing, we couldn't hear anything. And then I was due to go on duty that evening at about 6 o'clock, but when that happened, I went down to the operations centre and went into the operations centre and helped initially, and then I was an operations clerk. In the Task Force Operations Centre we had the operations map, and we had all the telephones and radios there, and we basically controlled what was going on nearly all of the time in the Task Force area, so that was what our job was there at that time. So I rushed down to help down there to see what was going on, and then we realised there's something big, and I think Dave will go through this from there. Initially we thought, headquarters thought that it was told that there was a contact with a platoon-sized contact. Then about half an hour or so later it went to a company-sized contact, and then another three-quarters hour later, suddenly it was 3 companies. So it really developed fairly quickly into something very big, and at that stage I think it's fair to say that a lot of communications broke down. My job was to actually log those communications and put them in the Task Force Operations log. I was supposed to get notes from duty officers, type them up and put them in, but communications between 6RR and headquarters virtually stopped. 6RR was over here focusing on what was going on out there, I think rightfully so. A lot of what happened is recorded in their log, but not in the Task Force headquarters log. The APCs then went out. Yeah, once it was realised there was potentially a battalion out there, then the APCs were put on standby, and no company was put on standby to go out. So it developed fairly quickly. Initially we thought there wasn't a great deal going on, it was just normal. But I think this was the first time they actually stood and fought. So up until then, nearly every contact, we'd have a contact skirmish for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then the enemy would withdraw. So was Task Force ready for it that day? I think the answer is no, we weren't. And 5RAR had been out in operation up north. They had all this front here. They'd just come back that day. I think we still had some elements up in Barb, which is further 5k north up there. So when they commenced the artillery last night, when a company was out, then one of the batteries was always tasked to support that company. So the initial artillery would have been in support of that company, and then later on when they realised how serious it was, then all of the guns joined in. Is that fair enough?
Yep, we'll go through that on the battlefield track.
But that gives you an idea of how far away we were, and
how close we were.
How close we were, and it was really traumatic, and everybody remembers it. Yeah. Thanks.
The engineers area. I was attached to engineers as a Ramey mechanic, and I was due out at 12 o'clock that night and didn't make it. We were there a complete night because of the mortaring started, and then because we expected that wave of people to come in under the mortaring, no one was moving, so we were stuck in the weapon pit all night. There's 2 of us in the weapon pit. which is about yay wide, and for some reason we didn't duck. We just wandered back on the forge across the bottom pit. Didn't get in each other's way. Sheer adrenaline took over, and yeah, we just wandered back in the forge. We had a big old World War II machine gun with us, and yeah, so that's where I was on the night before. So, we heard the pop of the mortars coming in, and the bunker, so I was right forward, there was a bunker behind us, and one of my mates was in that, and he had his feet up on the front of the parapet, and because it was a bit blasé at this stage, we've been in August, we've been in June, like, you know, and he suddenly got peppered with what he thought was rock, someone buggerising around throwing rock at him. The following morning he got up, we had a look around, and there's a pole here, he was sitting here, about 5 metres out there had been a mortar, and sprayed around him. The pole saved his life.
Yeah, I was in the command post again at 2 o'clock that morning when we were mortared. The command post, they said, was over here. I think most of the mortars and rockets fell in that range sort of from here to the left of the command post. A few went over. We would have taken about 10 to 20 rounds in the task force headquarters area itself. We had sandbags about this high. In order to get a counter bombardment going, we were doing everything, thinking that the canvas was a reasonably good protection, but we didn't even stop to think about that. I think Captain Goodwin was the operations officer that night, and he collected all the mortar traps. We have a code called mortar trap, which means mortar report. So all the companies out here in 5 and in 6 should have been sending in mortar traps to the engineers to say where we were. The artillery radar didn't work well that night, so we had to rely on those mortar traps and started plotting them before the counter bombardment could take place. So a lot of credit went to him. He passed those through to the tactical artillery centre, which then organised the counter bombardment. So that was my introduction to being fired upon. At the time, I guess I was so busy I didn't think about it, but next morning I went back to what was then my tent, and there's a photograph of it in the album there. My counterpart that was supposedly sleeping that night, but who stood too, eventually had gone to bed, and he woke up the next morning, got out of his little stretcher, and then sitting in front of him was what I think now is an artillery round, not a recall-less rifle round, that had actually hit the tree that our tent was tied up to, because we had no tent poles. Hit the tree, shook the whole thing, and woke him up and fell to the ground, and then he didn't think much about it after that, and we got up the next morning. So pretty close thing all around.